Hi, I'm Scott Olson with FounderBuzz, and back with us is Luke Kanies, our first founder of the month. Thanks for joining us.
Thanks for having me on the show.
Yeah, well, so last month when we spoke, we talked about your inspiration for Puppet Labs, and this time around, we'd like to get a little bit more detailed on just the open source software business and some of its unique challenges.
Okay.
So maybe to start off, what is something that makes open source software different than just running a regular software company?
I think it mostly comes down to it mostly is about revenue. That's the big difference. The software you're producing isn't that different, although certainly there are some technical differences. You tend to be a lot more open and a lot more online, and the people that work for you tend to be a lot more tend to be far more used to communicating in that way. But in terms of the ability to build a business and build a scalable company, it's really about revenue. And in this case, what I mean is, first is just how you make your revenue. And most open source businesses start as services businesses and then grow over time into product businesses. And that transition is very complicated, especially if you've built a business to work one way and then 1, 2, 3, 5 years in its existence, you decide to convert to another way. That's very difficult to do. Both it's just difficult to pull off, but it's difficult to make that mental shift to being really a product company who doesn't rely on services.
And does it require a shift in the existing employees that you have, or is it just hiring the right people at the right time?
It really just varies. I mean, sometimes your people can make the transition, sometimes they can't, but that's not the complicated thing. The biggest difference is the mental shift, and if you make the mental shift and you don't have the skill set, then you can deal with that appropriately. But it's really about the mental shift you have to make. And things like, do you accept custom development? Do you do this kind of services? Are you willing to put off your development roadmap for satisfying your customer for revenue? These are the things that every software company has to deal with in some way. But people who start out as services companies are used to having the same answer to this question every time. We do it for revenue. As you transition to a product company, you have that transition is made difficult because you're often finding yourself turning down revenue that a year ago you would have thought was awesome, and today you can't afford to take because it shifts your roadmap in a way that you can't afford.
Right. Well, and another aspect of open source companies that I think that Puppet Labs has done really well is fostering a strong, supportive community. How important is that community to an open source company's success?
It's absolutely critical, and I will say that you can be a company who produces software that you say is open source without an active community, but to really get the most out of being open source, to be beyond just I publish my code on the internet, you have to have an active community. And these people are out there. They're your marketing. They're out telling other people about your product. They're your customer research. They're telling you what you should be doing or could be doing with your product. They're your R&D. They're trying to do stupid things you never would have thought of that 6 months later look completely awesome. They're your debuggers. They're your documenters. They're people who keep you up at 3 a.m. They're absolutely critical. And if you don't have an active community, then you have to get that first. And if you're producing open source and you don't want an active community, then you shouldn't probably bother producing open source. It's one reason to release some that's not in your core path, but if you want your critical product, your core products to be open source, the big reason for that needs to be the community.
Yeah, and you certainly had a lot of people out there on your behalf. I mean, what are some of the things that you've done to actually make your community so active, engaged, and successful?
Well, I mean, obviously, the first thing you have to do is ship a product that they love. No amount of community building is going to get people to rave and present and yell about a product that they do think is a piece of crap. But once you've done that, that's still not enough. You have to be there. There were years where I wouldn't let a question go unanswered on the mailing list. There were meal after meal was interrupted by somebody asking me questions on IRC, and I could hear the IRC. Somebody mentioning my name on IRC makes a noise. I could hear that from the other room, and I'd leave the dinner table and go answer somebody's question on IRC. And just having constant, always-on response time. But at the same time, you have to give the community space to grow. You can't be the only person in the community with answers. You can't be the only person who knows why things are done a certain way. So you have to not just provide answers, but provide context, give people guidance on why you thought that way, so that the next person that comes along, if you're not around because you're doing something weird like sleeping or showering or whatever, then somebody else can help provide those answers. And so you have to both be always involved, but also provide space.
Right. I mean, if there's an entrepreneur out there right now taking a look at starting an open source project, building a community, figuring out their revenue, what are maybe a couple pieces of advice you might have for them?
the thing about growing a business is it is always about the revenue. Revenue is the thing that allows you to scale. It's either revenue or investment, and at some point, investment needs to be about revenue. So you have to have an understanding of where your revenue is going to come from in 5 years, and what plan you need to be on to get you to that point in 5 years. And everything you do between now and that revenue showing up at some point is kind of preparation. And in some ways, it doesn't matter. It's until you get to that point, it's all just a test. It's not the real thing. So understand where you want to be, where that revenue is going to be coming from. Understand what your multipliers are. Understand, just how you're going to interact, how you're going to get the most out of the community, but also how you're going to build, full-time paying customers. And in the Puppet world, we don't work very hard to try to convert Puppet users who are just using the open source product into paying customers. We try to find new customers. We try to find that our users are the people who are making our product better every time. And our paying customers are the people who don't have time to do that. They just want the product to work. They want it to go away, essentially. They want it to fade into the background so they can just get work done. So understanding the difference between those two and selling appropriately is really critical.
Right. So the community being there to make sure that you have an awesome product and making it available and open for this much broader audience.
Yeah, and it's important to realize that you're not taking advantage of the community. They're getting value from this, right? It's not like you're exploiting them in some way, and because they're not paying you, they're providing this other service to you. They're acting in their own self-interest. They're trying to find a community of like-minded individuals. They're trying to make a product that they live with every day better. And a lot of our community members, I won't say a lot, but enough of our community members are a little bit pissed at some aspects of Puppet and some aspects of what we do. But that's part of, you have those people in the community. You have people who are frustrated, people who are trying to push things in this way or that way, people who are always trying to, not just exist, but to push. And the truth about the community is if you don't talk, then there's no community, right? And the talking is almost always, here's the thing that's not perfect. So, yeah.
And certainly that's a way for them to have an impact on the roadmap changes that they want to see right away, whereas with the traditional software company, they just can't kind of have that same kind of influence.
Yeah, and that's another big difference between your commercial customers and your community members, is that your commercial customers tend, at least in our case, and I think this is pretty general in talking to other open source CEOs, your commercial customers tend to not be nearly as interactive as the community members. So you have a very different kind of relationship with them than you do with the community. And it's much more, in general, you won't hear from them unless something is really actually broken and they want help for 20 minutes and then they want to not talk to you anymore. They aren't going to come see you talk. They aren't going to, things like that. So it's a very different relationship, and understanding that is definitely critical to building a company.
Great. Well, thanks again for taking the time with us today, Luke.
Thank you.
Best of luck.
All right.